system. And the endocrine system has a bunch of glands in it, and each of these glands is going to be responsible for secreting hormones, right? And so we are going to define hormone for about the 1,000th time this year. Hormones are chemical messengers. Hopefully you know that by now. And there are two classes of hormones. Those two classes are going to determine what, where the receptors are for those hormones. So two classes of hormones. First class are what we call fat-soluble hormones. And those fat-soluble hormones are going to be lipid-based or steroid-based. I say lipid or steroid, but really don't forget that steroids are lipids. Okay? These types of hormones, because they are fat-soluble, the key here is that they are going to be able to dissolve in the phospholipid bilayer, or rather move through the phospholipid bilayer, and therefore they're going to be able to get into the actual cells. Okay, so these are able to pass through the phospholipid bilayer. Therefore, receptors for these hormones are on the inside of the cell. Okay. Sometimes they are located on the nuclear envelope, in which case they will activate some second messenger that acts as a transcription factor in the nucleus. That means that it's going to cause some gene to be transcribed. In more rare cases, these fat-soluble hormones can actually act as the transcription factor by themselves, and so they don't even need a second messenger. Yeah, those are in contrast to the other type of hormone, which is called a water-soluble hormone. And those water solubles are going to be peptide-based, which means they're made out of proteins. Because they're made out of proteins, the receptors are the hormones rather are not going to be able to pass through the phospholipid bilayer, and therefore the receptors have to be on the cell membrane, right? So receptors are on the outside of the cell membrane. And when one of these hormones attaches to those receptors, that's going to cause what's called a signal transduction pathway, and it's going to release something called a second messenger inside the cell that's then going to trigger some response. Okay, so these release second messengers inside the cell that trigger a response. It's also worth noting that there's another way that we can talk about hormones. There's what's called the endocrine system. And the endocrine system is something where these hormones are going to be secreted inside the body, and they're going to be used for internal purposes really only. For internal use only. Right? And then there is something called the exocrine system. which is not really used as much in humans because we have a pretty good method of communication that's not hormone based, right? We can like talk to each other and stuff, so that's important. But it's still present. And these are hormones that are secreted outside the body, right? And they're going to trigger a response in other members of the species. Okay, so hormones secreted externally that trigger responses in other members of the species. For instance, sweat has pheromones in it that cause arousal in the opposite sex. So you may think sweaty boys smell bad. They don't. All right, so they do, but also there's other things too, right? So these pheromones, it's not necessarily the bad smell that is supposed to be the pheromone. It's other chemicals that are in there. So yeah. All right. Let's talk about the major glands of the endocrine system. All right, so let's do this. Let's come over here. Let's draw a dude. There's my dude. Okay, so let's start at the top where these glands would be located. So we're gonna look first at a gland that is located in the brain. Right about here. That's number one. Okay? And number one is going to be the pineal gland. Pineal gland's job is to control sleep and wakefulness and the circadian rhythm. Controls sleep patterns. And circadian rhythm. The most common hormone secreted by the pineal gland, anybody know what it's called? Controls sleep patterns? Melatonin. Interestingly enough, melatonin doesn't make you sleep, it just makes you want to sleep. Right? So if you have some other problem that's keeping you awake, like let's say you drank a bunch of caffeine or something like that, sorry, as much as you want to sleep, it's still not going to happen. You're just going to toss and turn. So you can take all the melatonin you want, and it's just going to make you want to lay there more, but it's not going to make you sleep. Right? So another thing that we've learned about recently is that the pineal gland is regulated by light that's absorbed by the eyes or taken in by the eyes. And specifically, blue light is going to inhibit the release of melatonin by the pineal gland. And so we saw that there was a increase in the amount of cases of insomnia that were happening like in the last 20 years or so. And we're like, why is this happening? And then we're like, oh wait, what are people doing right before they go to bed? They're watching TV or they're sitting on their computer. And so these monitors, these backlit monitors, have a lot of blue light in them. And that was causing people's pineal glands to not produce a lot of melatonin, and therefore they weren't really feeling tired. And so it's not like they weren't tired, it's not that they couldn't sleep, it's that they just weren't trying to sleep because they didn't have the melatonin to tell them to sleep. Okay, there's a really good program for computers if you're somebody who's on the computer late at night. It's called Flux, and what it does is at sundown every day, it removes the blue light from your monitor, and so it makes it like look really red and orange. But it makes it so that at night you actually get tired. If I'm on a monitor that doesn't have Flux on it anymore, I can like go straight through the night, like never even think about sleep at all. But throw Flux on there around 11:30, I'm like, ugh, getting a little tired. I should probably go to bed, right? Pineal gland. I literally will not go to bed. Also, it's really good because, like, if I have something that I have to do, like, let's say I was like, all right, guys, I'll definitely have your grades ready by Wednesday, right? And then, like, 11:30 rolls around, I just turn Flux off, and I'm like, bro, let's do this thing. All right. So next, very close to this, about right here in the brain, that's called the Pituitary gland. Okay, pituitary gland is divided into two different glands. There's what's called the anterior pituitary gland and the posterior pituitary gland. The anterior pituitary gland is not all that exciting. Anterior pituitary. Anterior pituitary's job is to control all the rest of the hormones. Controls the rest of the glands to control the rest of the hormones. So controls other glands. Okay, so like for instance, one of the main things that's secreted by the pituitary, the anterior pituitary, is something called TSH, which stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. Well, guess what the thyroid is? It's another gland. So like this gland's job is to just stimulate other glands to do their job. Now, the importance of that is that the pituitary gland being so close to the brain is affected by what's happening in your brain. And so it's basically just your brain's way of being able to control your endocrine system. Because the endocrine system and the brain, they have to work together. And so this thing is sort of like allowing that to happen. Okay? Posterior pituitary gland. Is going to do different things, two main things. Number one, it's going to secrete a hormone that is called anti-diuretic hormone. And like I said, we're really just going over the main hormones that are being released by these things. There are other smaller ones too, but the anti-diuretic hormone is a really important one. It's got a couple different names. Mostly it's called antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. Okay, and sometimes it's called vasopressin, though. That's like the technical term for it. Okay, ADH is a hormone that triggers your kidneys to absorb more water. Okay, it tells them, hey, don't get rid of the water in the urine. We still need it. We're dehydrated or something like that, or we have a lot of physical activity going on. So just make sure you hang on to that water. We really need it. Okay, so signals the kidneys to reabsorb water. So if you've ever peed and you're like, man, that pee is really yellow, it's probably because of ADH, right? Also because you're dehydrated. So when you become dehydrated, when you haven't had a lot of water, there's a lot of antidiuretic hormone in the body. When you are running a lot or physically exerted, that's another thing that causes the release of ADH, which is then going to signal the kidneys that they need to reabsorb water. Another thing that ADH does, though, is very interesting. In men, not really in women, but in men, it causes long-lasting emotional bonds. Yeah, weird, huh? All right, so the way this sort of plays out now in our society, in the United States, is that men tend to be the best friends with other men that they were around when they were playing sports or doing physical activity, right? So, like your sports buddies, those are your buddies for the rest of your life, okay? Pretty much everybody can sort of relate to that. Think about, somebody who was on a soccer team you were on when you were a little kid and you were really physically exerting yourself. Those are like your friends. And even if you don't really talk to them anymore, you're like, oh yeah, that guy, he's cool. Unless he like wronged you in some way. But, for the most part, okay? But if you think about it evolutionarily, it doesn't really make as much sense anymore with sports. But evolutionarily, it makes a lot of sense. Because what are the two things that are going to cause the most release of antidiuretic hormone as we are evolving? Hunting and Well, hunting is like, yeah, we wouldn't really run unless we were hunting or fighting, right? So fighting is the second thing. So in these two cases, it makes perfect sense. So number one, if you're hunting, you want the other guys that you're hunting with to have your back, right? You don't want to be hunting for a wild boar or something, and the boar like turns on you, and they're like, "Oh man, Jim's gonna die. That sucks." Right? You want him to like go and chase the boar down and protect you. Same thing goes with war. In times of war, you want the guys that you're fighting with to have some vested interest in you to make sure that you're not going to die. They have your back, right? This is caused by the release of antidiuretic hormone that allows men to form long-lasting emotional bonds with one another, because those are the times in which they need to form those bonds, is when they are in times of stress, in times of physical exertion. All right. So, other thing that's released by the posterior pituitary gland is, and it doesn't really, this ADH doesn't really work in females. It has very little effect, okay? But in females, there's another thing that does, called oxytocin. And we've talked about oxytocin before. Oxytocin is released by uterine contractions, right? Released when the uterus contracts. It also causes uterine contractions. So that's weird, right? Released by uterus contractions causes the contractions of the uterus. Therefore, this is a positive feedback loop where once the uterus contracts once, that's going to release oxytocin, which causes the uterus to contract again, probably a little harder this time, which releases more oxytocin. That process goes on and on and on, and we refer to it as childbirth or labor, right? And it's really the thing that causes it to escalate, is this increased amount of oxytocin released. Whenever they induce labor, what they do is they inject you with a bunch of synthetic oxytocin, which is called Pitocin, right? That causes the uterus to start contracting, and when the uterus starts contracting, that releases the natural oxytocin, which then raises the level a whole bunch, and hopefully then leads to successful labor, right? It also causes what's called the letdown of breast milk. Now, breast milk is produced at the tail end of the third trimester, but it's not like pregnant women are constantly leaking breast milk or anything. Sometimes, but mostly not. And it's because of this, because there's not a lot of oxytocin around, and therefore the breast milk that's being produced is still not available. It's not available until there's a large release of oxytocin. Now, perhaps the most important thing, definitely the most important thing evolutionarily, is that in men, but significantly more in women, causes long-lasting emotional bonds. Okay? So, evolutionarily, why is this important? At what instance is a mother going to have the highest concentration of oxytocin in her body that she ever will? Yeah.
So when she has a kid, it's like it causes that emotional bond between them and the child.
Yes. I love my daughter very much. Okay? Just going to preface that. Babies suck. They do nothing for you. They cry a lot. They poop. They throw up on you. They can't even smile at you, right? They are just blobs of horribleness for like a solid 3 months, okay? But you have to like them because you need to care for them, right? So, a mother gets this really awesome biological boost in that, saying like, hey, you love this thing, right? You have to, because you are biologically supposed to now because we've released so much of this oxytocin. So you're like, oh, we got this baby. Oh my God, I love this baby so much. It's so great. But like logically, if you were to write down like a pros and cons list, it's like all cons, right? But like oxytocin is a big pro, and so you're like, oh, but I love it. I can't explain it. Well, this is how you explain it. It's caused by all the oxytocin present in your body. In fact, women who get scheduled C-sections that never go into labor, the doctors help you out a bit and just shoot you up with a little bit of Pitocin afterwards, so you still love your baby. It's a real thing. It's a real thing. Why do men love their baby? Because they're supposed to. That's what it is. You just plain have to. 3 months in, you're like, oh God, this baby, it's killing me. Oh, so you noticed that, right? In men, but significantly more in women. Orgasms. Both men and women release oxytocin in small quantities after orgasm. And so that's what causes emotional bonds in that way, too. All right. So thyroid is next. The thyroid's in your neck. So like that's this part right here, I guess. So the thyroid gland is going to control your metabolism, right? So it controls the metabolism. And the metabolism ultimately is going to give you your energy level. So it controls energy level. There are two diseases that are associated with the thyroid gland. One of them is called hyperthyroidism, where your body releases too much of the hormones that are released by the thyroid and causes you to have a super high metabolism. And so you tend to be super hyper and have energy all the time, and you can eat like 7,000 calories a day and never gain weight, right? That's called hyperthyroidism. There's also hypothyroidism, where your thyroid doesn't function as well as it should, doesn't release enough of those hormones. That causes you to be very lethargic and tired and gain weight and all kinds of terrible things like that, okay? They treat hypothyroidism most of the time. In most cases, they can treat it with vitamin B12 shots. Right? And the interesting thing about that is you may have seen a lot of vitamin B12. What that you have access to often has a lot of vitamin B12 in it. No. No.
It's something
Energy drinks have a lot of vitamin B12 in them. Okay, specifically 5-Hour Energy has something like 7,000% of your daily recommended intake of vitamin B12 in it, right? And that's why 5-Hour Energy gives you energy, because it makes your thyroid go freaking nuts. Yeah.
There's, like, you can be B12 anemic, can't you? Is that someone is like anemic, but then it was like a B12 deficiency. So if you have B12 deficiency, is that like?
It could possibly
Is that
cause
like
anemia.
hypothyroidism? Or are they not related?
Not related.
But B12
Nope.
can help correct that.
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
It's like hyper, thyroid is one thing else.
Like, do they have a way to treat that, or is that not as much of a?
It's not as much of a problem as hypothyroidism. Having too much energy could be annoying, but it's not a terrible thing, right?
Don't you need,
I could deal with a little more energy from time to time.
Don't you need, eat a lot more food?
You do, yeah. It's not really the worst thing ever, right?
I mean,
Oh God, I gotta eat 4,000 calories today. What am I gonna? Brownies.
Evolutionary, like over time.
Evolutionarily, sure, it could have been a problem, but current society, you got McDonald's, you can get 4,000 calories real quick, right? All right. So you've also got this thing underneath the thyroid. It's actually like right on top of it. It's like the thyroid's like a really big thing, and the parathyroid is like squished to the side of it. Okay, called the parathyroid. And the parathyroid is going to control blood calcium levels. So there's also this thing called parathyroidism, which can be caused by a lot of different things. Sometimes you can get a cyst on your parathyroid. Sometimes you can get a little tumor on your parathyroid, and it causes your parathyroid to release way too much of its hormone that is going to raise blood calcium levels. And so your body then starts absorbing all this calcium from your food that would normally be excreted. And the other thing is, like, it always wants more calcium. And so the term that's associated with parathyroidism most of the time is called the stones, the groans, and the broken bones, is what they call it. Stones, groans, and broken bones. And so stones comes from the fact that you've got all this other extra blood calcium that has to be filtered out by your kidneys. And so you get calcium-based kidney stones. Broken bones are caused by the fact that your blood is constantly trying to get more calcium, and so it's leaching the calcium away from your bones and causes your bones to become brittle, right? And then the moans or groans come from the fact that we said that your nerve impulses are regulated by calcium. And so what happens is you have all this extra calcium in your blood, which means that your nerve impulses get they fire more readily. So they're like, it's a stimulatory response, and so all your nerves begin to fire more readily, which tells you more about like what's going on in your body. And so you tend to get all like achy because you're getting all this sensory input, like, oh, my back hurts and my legs hurt, because all your nerves are firing more than they should, right? That's the parathyroid. Number 5, we've got the pancreas. The pancreas is like right here. The pancreas is actually, its main role is to be part of the digestive system, but it also plays a role in the endocrine system by regulating blood calcium, or not blood calcium, blood sugar. Regulates blood sugar. And so you have two main hormones that are associated with pancreas. One of them is called insulin. Insulin is going to tell your body to take some of that blood sugar, that blood glucose, and turn it into something called glycogen, which is a polysaccharide that's stored in your liver and also in your muscles. So uses blood glucose to produce glycogen. And then if you have too much blood sugar, or sorry, too little blood sugar rather, if you are like fasting or something, that is going to release something called glucagon, which is going to break down glycogen to increase blood glucose. So these are both examples of negative feedback. So if your blood glucose is high, your body releases insulin that uses that blood glucose to produce glycogen, which then lowers your blood sugar and stops the insulin from being released. If your blood glucose is low, your body releases glucagon, which breaks down some of the glycogen and increases the blood glucose, which stops more glucagon from being released. Right? So negative feedback loops. This is in contrast to the positive feedback loop that we saw with oxytocin and uterine contractions. Right? Next, you got your adrenal glands. Adrenal glands are located right above your kidneys, right about there. In fact, the word adrenal means adjacent to the renal, which is the kidneys. Right? Renal means kidney. So adrenal glands. And so the adrenal glands are divided into two different glands here. You've got what's called the adrenal cortex, which is mostly going to secrete sex hormones. and then the one that you normally think about when you think about the adrenal glands, and that is the adrenal medulla. And the adrenal medulla has epinephrine and norepinephrine. And we usually refer to epinephrine and norepinephrine as what? Adrenaline. Which makes sense because adrenaline is secreted by the adrenal glands, right? Adrenaline, adrenal. And then the epinephrine thing is also interesting because this word that's in the middle there, the nephron is the functional unit of the kidney. So again, this is alluding to the fact that it's being produced by something that's by the kidneys, right? And the interesting thing about epinephrine and norepinephrine is not only is it going to act as a hormone that has all kinds of effects on the body, like decreasing your the dilation of your blood vessels, right? It causes your blood vessels to constrict. It also reduces your digestion. It stops or slows down peristalsis. But it also acts as a neurotransmitter. So it's an excitatory neurotransmitter. And so it gets into the synapses of your neurons and then makes them more likely to fire. Right? And then last, you've got here in women, here in men, that's number 7, the gonads. So in men, that's the testes. And that's going to produce things like testosterone, and it's going to cause all the secondary sex characteristics for men. And then in females, the gonads are the ovaries. Right? And so the ovaries, again, are going to release the hormones that cause the secondary sex characteristics, but also are going to help in the regulation of the menstrual cycle. It doesn't do the whole thing, but is involved in it. Right? So controls female secondary sex characteristics. Regulates menstrual cycle. These are the things that are controlled by the hormones. We obviously know that the testes and ovaries have other functions as well. Testes is the site of, or the location of the production of sperms, spermatogenesis, and the ovaries is where ovulation begins. But those are not really related to the endocrine system, right? We're only talking about the hormones here, and so these hormones are mostly just going to be involved in controlling secondary sex characteristics. Questions on that? All right, that's it.